Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate Podcast.
Hello, this is Greg Palmer welcoming you to another episode of the Finovate Podcast. We are continuing our conversations with our FinovateEurope Best of Show winners. These are the companies that were selected by our audience in London earlier in February as being the top 3 most innovative, exciting technologies on display. And joining me today, we have Ohad Kotler, co-founder and CEO of Tweezr. Ohad, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, first off, congratulations on taking home a trophy. It was a very compelling demo that you were able to give up on stage, and obviously a very competitive process given the quality of companies that we had up there. As I mentioned last week, all of the demo videos from Finovate Europe are available online. You can find those at finovate.com/videos. But for people who haven't seen your demo, can you start by just giving us a little bit of introduction on yourself and what Tweezr is all about?
Yeah, of course. So my name is Ohad. Started my path in McKinsey, moved to ING. At ING, I dealt with the challenges of building new functionalities, new capabilities on top of an existing complex systems, as well as being part of a massive migration effort and all of the challenges that come with that. And knowing that challenge, experiencing it firsthand, we decided to start together with my co-founders to start a company that is designed to help dealing with those challenges better and basically be able to address legacy systems in a completely different way than what I had available for me at the time, where the core premise of our solution is that the right way to address legacy system is not by thinking from a replacement perspective, where you will just come in and say, I have a beautiful magic bullet, let's just replace everything and it will be okay. But rather looking at legacy systems as where decades of know-how and important functionalities and capabilities have been formed, and that the critical step is to deeply understand what those are and how to reverse engineer the existing system and the logic that sits within it in order to be able to decide what are the things that you want to do with that system, how to evolve it further. And if you do want to replace or rewrite, to understand where and how to do that in a much more robust and granular way.
Yeah, it really is a cool demo. And I think the fact that you come to it with this background of understanding, what those pain points are is obviously really helpful as you go through the process, not only of building it, but of communicating out to the group of people that you need to reach to make them understand what you're working on. So can you give us just a little bit more of kind of the technical side in terms of how Tweezr works and what you obviously don't create the whole demo again, but just how did it evolve and what are some highlights?
Yeah, so in the demo, what we have shown and what the product fundamentally does, first of all, we start from the code itself. We start from source code because source code is source of truth. Right? At the end of the day, that is what the system does. By being able to understand and unpack that source code, how different elements work, how do they interact, what are the dependencies, and how do the sequences of activities that are happening in the code work, you can really start building a meaningful understanding. On the other side, what we do, that is the bottom-up round-up understanding. On the other side, we have a top-down understanding in which we maintain a perspective using our membership in Bayan and other sources to have a deep view on how a bank operates. What are the things that are happening in it? How can you organize the thinking of the bank in a meaningful way? And by combining those two views together, this round-up plus top-down structuring, you are able to create a stable, robust capability map of the different processes and services that are happening within the bank itself as it is today. Now, the reason that is so powerful is because once you do that level of abstraction that provides meaning, you are able to maintain a layer of knowledge, a layer of understanding, a semantic meaning to how your system operates, what is happening in it at the different levels of abstraction, and be able to pull from it the information required for any type of agent, any type of LLM, to be able to design change in an effective way.
And I think that's really the critical component, right? That designing change in an effective way is obviously a real challenge. And it's something which has been a pain point now for a long time. So you talked a little bit about, how it works, but specifically, what are you able to do that others aren't? Because obviously this is something which people have been working on, people have been thinking about for a long time now. And yet your solution really seems to resonate in a way that signifies that you can do something which is not common.
So I think there's two things to it. So first, we are AI native in the sense that we have been born into the AI world. We are about a year and a half old year company. And we have designed ourselves from the ground up to enable LLMs and agents and AI to consume the type of know-how that is required to build those very robust levels of understanding. So with that capability, we have been building a very deep layer of deterministic understanding of the underlying code, which is, yes, a technology that existed for a long time, but has been very difficult to consume and make useful without these latest capabilities derived from the LLM introduction. And then on the other front, because we are very business oriented and are coming from the specific industry of banking, we have a very good understanding of what are the types of know-how that is required to provide context for agentic frameworks to be able to organize information in a meaningful way. So the combination of the two allows us to create something that is very unique and creates, kind of exposes and makes visible I always talk about opening the black box or front of the hood of the trunk to be able to see what is happening within that black box in a meaningful way that business people, product managers, system analysts, and technology leaders can consume and can really work with and make decisions on.
Cool. I'd like to switch gears a little bit because there's some interesting news that came out actually after Finovate Europe, before we were recording this podcast. Anthropic had a big announcement that Claude Code can now modernize systems from Cobalt to Java. This was a big shock, right? It sent IBM stock into, I don't want to say a free fall, but it did go down quite a bit. What are your thoughts on this? How is it impacting yourselves? How is it impacting the ecosystem? What do you take away from that?
First of all, it's impressive, right? It is absolutely phenomenal to see how much capabilities are moving towards this space that we know and have so much experience with, and that requires opportunities. That said, looking at the announcement of Anthropic, as well as the reactions from IBM, first of all, we have seen that, of course, a long time ago. The process that has led to that, they actually released several months ago a demo that they have already showed how they do this. I think the key thing to understand is that what Anthropic has brought up is speed. It's an incredible ability so that once you know exactly what needs to change and how, to be able to execute it at scale, at a massive speed, and at the cost of LLM, which is indeed dramatically lower than the cost of the consulting team you will need to have in order to do something like this. On the other hand, if you're thinking about what it takes to evolve or maintain or replace a legacy system, the speed is just one of several elements. I would name the other two being clarity, knowing exactly what it is that system does and why it does what it does. Because at the end of the day, there needs to be a human that says that the new system is doing what I want it to do. And if you just replace yellow spaghetti into blue spaghetti, it is very hard to consume or to know what to do with that new spaghetti you've created. And the other part is safety or avoiding disruption. Because if you think about many of us who consume LLMs and agentic solutions every day, we all know how much variance, how much inherent instability they bring to any day-to-day activity that we do. And then to think about that running independently on a core banking system, that's far from kind of realistic to do in a very large and complex organization. So being able to create and to bring to the world the right structures that will organize and stabilize the change and will allow humans to properly understand what is changing and how to make sure that the blast radius of a change is reasonable. Those are the capabilities we have been working on from day one, because we knew that what Claude Code is doing is kind of, we will never be able to compete with it, nor do we want to, right? We want to complement that and make it more powerful.
I think that's, the fact that you're able to see it coming. And also, again, I come back to the fact that you have this experience where you kind of know what it's like on the other side. You think about where humans need to be involved in this process. There's obviously a lot of critical places where you can't trust everything to AI yet. And so having these kind of human beings coming at these touch points and being able to understand where we need this oversight is a really critical piece as well. And I think this probably really helps to capture the audience's attention. And we should take a moment and recognize that this is your second time in 2 years winning Best of Show at Finovate Europe. And so clearly there's something that is resonating really strongly with our audience and your solution. I want to talk about the momentum that you're seeing as a company kind of coming off of those back-to-back wins. Obviously, you're still very early stage in the big picture of things. What are you seeing now, kind of having been to our European event and walking home with the trophy twice?
So I do consider myself quite lucky, and I'm super happy to attend, and I will be attending the next event as well, as I find Finovate a fantastic opportunity. In the event we just had in London, the ability to show on stage what we have done, and or what we are building and the capabilities we bring. And having in attendance many of the more, probably each one of the big banks of the UK, plus multiple other relevant banks, both from the US and others, was super helpful and started a bunch of interesting conversation, both from the bank side, but also from the core banking side, which we have found to be a very relevant collaboration mechanism because core banking solutions struggles with very similar challenges, right? They have large and complex systems that are quite old often, and the ability to maintain and evolve them is definitely a challenge both for them and for their clients. All of those conversations have been triggered at Finovate, and we're now engaged in conversations pretty much with all participants. I would say that we have matured quite a bit between those two phases, right? We now have multiple banks active in production. We have a product that is robust. We know the difference between being in POC mode and being in production mode, and how difficult it is to bring things to production when it comes to AI solutions, where everything looks wonderful in the first 5 minutes, and the moment you start diving, it becomes harder and harder. So there was definitely evolution also in our end between the two periods.
Yeah. Well, and again, you can go back, not only can you see this year's demo video, but you can see last year's as well. So you can compare them side by side and see exactly how far they were able to progress between 2025 and 2026. In the demo this time, you mentioned a kind of fictional character named Bob, who I thought was really clever. Bob is a soon to retire coder who is the sole person at your organization who really understands all of the legacy code. I heard you talk about a lot of the different types of people that you met. Did you meet any Bobs, any of those kind of soon to retire programmers, or any people who work with a Bob who can kind of validate that this is a legitimate character that exists in the wild, as they say?
Absolutely. Well, I don't think I've met any Bobs in Finovate itself, maybe one, but I definitely met a lot of people who know many Bobs, right? Like the types of challenge that we're dealing with is almost inherently related to people that have been around for a long time. They've either built or been maintaining these systems for probably decades. And the know-how that they bring to the table is invaluable, but they are retiring. And this is a real challenge many of the banks face. And those are challenges we face today. So in the clients in the banks we're working with and we are on deployment with, we work with Bobs. We help them and they help us understand better how to think through their system, how to evolve that system, because they also know they need to create that knowledge transfer to their teams.
Yeah, it's such a good way to kind of humanize it, right? Because again, I think that everybody who works in the space, somebody like that, right? That person that the organization can't do without. And you also look at them and say, man, how much longer are they going to stick around? We have another 2-3 years left before this person decides to ride off into the sunset. I have a slightly different question for you before we come to the close, which is, I look at this from a kind of global standpoint. Do you have a sense of how different geographies are experiencing these legacy code pain points? I mean, obviously, you're very active in Europe, but I know you have some exposure to other markets as well. Do different regions, different geographies experience some of these pain points differently?
Absolutely. I think one thing that we've learned that I found very interesting is how different it is when it comes to owning and maintaining your own core banking system versus using a third-party kind of core banking solution. So we find it that in most European countries, large banks will have their own full core banking system end to end, often because they had to maintain it versus different regulations, etc. While if you look at the Middle East or Asia, oftentimes you will see much more off-the-shelf core banking systems. Partially it's because they came to the world a bit later, partially either they have modernized towards it. And also if you look at the US, we have been finding pretty stark splits between the very large banks that will be maintaining completely their systems and many of the very small banks or community banks that will be absolutely much more in a third party. Now, for us, dealing with those two is very different. And one of the challenges that we see across the board is that if you don't own your own source code, if you don't own your own systems, it is very hard to be able to understand what it is that you want to change and where do you need to take it. I think the world of AI now has actually created a very shaking moment for the concept of third-party solutions as a whole, because one, you can do things faster, but two, having your core capability owned by someone else or maintained by someone else means that you are not in control and you cannot choose what is the path or direction of change. And that is very difficult. But that said, if I'm looking at the markets in which the core banking systems are by third parties, there oftentimes the opportunity is to work with those core banking system providers. We actually have been in talks in multiple of those, and first have their similar challenge, right? As I've mentioned before. And two, they have a secondary challenge, which is how can I use AI to introduce better capabilities to my clients? How do I enable them to benefit from the fact that we now move faster? One way will be change request management, but you can do a lot deeper if the clients themselves understand what is the business purpose of your system and how can you consume new capabilities on top of it. So there's a very interesting separation of opportunities between different phases of those banks or the different types of systems that they use. But regardless, this is a challenge that everyone faces in one shape or another.
Yeah. The universality of it is obviously a really common thread. And again, you see a lot of that different regional flavors, but at the same time, there's some really big common threads that unite everybody. Looks like we have time for one more question here, and it's a very simple one. It's simply, what's next for Tweezr from here? Any plans for the future that you can share with us beyond, coming to Finovate Europe again to defend your crown?
Yes. If you look at our first year's Finovate video and then the second one, you'll see that the evolution that we have been through is one where we move from a solution that tries to solve something relatively small of like one feature request to a world where we really try to explain fundamentally an entire system, right? That movement upwards in the value chain, I believe, will only going to continue and evolve as AI capabilities become better. So that will be both system level design, and it will mean probably more and more approach towards the business. So the ability of the business to really engage in a meaningful way with the existing systems or new systems that they are designing. And we see more and more of that, right? This is the transition we see around the world, and being a key part of enabling that in the specific context of banking and banking systems. It's a very exciting opportunity because it's huge. It's almost infinite in size.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but congratulations again. And thank you for taking the time to give us a little bit more behind the scenes peek. Again, take a look at Ohad's video up at finovate.com/videos, along with all of the videos from our Finovate Europe event in London this year. And stay tuned next week as we wrap up the series. In the meantime, Ohad, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me. Much appreciated.
Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.